The transit corridor hissed shut behind Mara, sealing off the hum of the derelict library core as she stepped into the expansive silence of the tidal matrix chamber. Sunlight filtered through high, crystalline apertures, casting long, geometric shadows across the floor. Her boots clicked against the grating, a sharp sound quickly swallowed by the vastness. This chamber, once the beating heart of the coordinate cluster's restoration efforts, now lay dormant beneath a fluctuating resonance baseline that made the air taste of ozone and static. The sunlight warmed the composite surface of the primary control console, highlighting faint scratches where previous stewards had attempted similar interfaces. Before her rose the monolith of smooth, pale alloy etched with glyphs, its interface lights dark, waiting for a signal that would match the chamber's own restless frequency. Mara approached the console with the steady pace of someone accustomed to listening before acting. She extended her hand, aligning her palm with the reception node, and initiated the standard calibration sequence she had used successfully at every other way station in the network. The console responded instantly, not with the warm glow of acceptance, but with a dull, pulsing amber light that throbbed irregularly. As Mara adjusted her parameters, the chamber's acoustic dampeners engaged, their harmonic layers sliding across one another with fluid, unpredictable precision. Standard protocols were rejected. The dampeners were not malfunctioning, they were actively filtering, rejecting the rigid, fixed frequencies of her tools in favor of a dynamic acceptance threshold that moved like water. Stepping back, Mara pulled up the diagnostic overlay on her wrist display to analyze the resistance. The tidal flow sensors were reporting data that defied static analysis. Deep beneath the chamber floor, water surged through ancient subterranean channels, feeding a complex hydrological network dormant for centuries. The Matrix was not just monitoring these flows, it was listening to them. The baseline resonance was unstable by design, reacting to natural water table movements with subtle variations in pitch and amplitude. Every rise in the groundwater scent ripples through the chamber's energy field, forcing the architecture to adjust its own internal tension. She watched the waveforms on her display dance like schools of silver fish, splitting and merging as pressure shifted in the deep channels, mirroring the planetary hydrology rather than imposing a fixed cycle upon it. Mara attempted a forceful static handshake, trying to impose order. Locking her resonator into a fixed frequency derived from the idealized calibration values in the blueprints, she pushed the command through the dampeners. The console flared bright red, the light harsh and strobing. A sharp harmonic spike lanced through the chamber, vibrating against her teeth and rattling the tools at her belt. The rejection was immediate and defensive. Her diagnostic tools whined in protest before going dead, their screens blanking out as the system severed the connection to protect its integrity. The machinery had recognized the attempt to force a static alignment as a threat, treating the command as an intrusion rather than a valid invitation. Silence settled over the chamber, broken only by the low thrum of the water table echoing through the stone walls. Mara let out a slow breath, her mind racing through the implications of what had just occurred. The rejection was not an error to be patched, it was a protective filter. The architects had designed this matrix not as a machine to be commanded or forced into submission, but as a partner requiring cooperative calibration. Rigid inputs would always fail because the architecture was built to adapt, never to dictate human behavior. She looked back at the dormant console, her frustration dissolving into a clear, focused resolve. Standard engineering protocols were fundamentally incompatible with this adaptive architecture. To proceed, she would have to abandon the comfort of fixed frequencies and embrace a new approach, one that required listening to the world before speaking to it, offering cooperation rather than control. She would have to calibrate her tools not to the machine, but to the flow, creating a feedback loop that honored the water's rhythm. The tidal energy matrix demanded a harmonic dialogue, and Mara Venn was just beginning to learn the language required to answer. Mara stood before the primary console, her fingers tracing the holographic waveforms that pulsed in time with the chamber's breathing architecture. The light filtering through the crystalline support pillars shifted with the chamber's rhythm, casting long, warm shadows that danced across the console screens. The harmonic rejection patterns had ceased their frantic resistance. Instead, they settled into a rhythmic cadence, revealing the dampening field's predictable cycles. She pulled up the expanded builder philosophy data she had secured from the central archive. The architect's intent was clear. Systems were meant to evolve alongside their users, not dictate to them. By cross-referencing the dampening field's acoustic signature against this philosophical framework, Mara identified a compatible resonance pattern. It wasn't a key to be forced, but a tone to be shared. She noticed how the rejection waves mirrored the stress fractures in the surrounding rock, suggesting the field was protecting the structure from tidal shear rather than hostile intrusion. This insight deepened her confidence. The matrix was not an adversary, but a guardian awaiting a partner who understood its purpose. Moving to the secondary analysis alcove, Mara engaged the tidal flow sensors. The chamber was situated deep within a geothermal sink, where water table movements dictated the energy baseline. She calculated the exact timing of the upcoming tidal surges, noting how the pressure fluctuations correlated with shifts in the ambient acoustic dampening. Meticulously, she mapped these temporal intervals to the cooperative calibration matrix extracted from the climate archives. The data aligned perfectly. The matrix wasn't static. It was a living map of recovery, synchronized with the planet's own restorative rhythms. Each surge offered a window where the chamber's defenses lowered naturally, inviting collaboration rather than confrontation. Mara plotted 3 distinct convergence points over the next hour, marking them as optimal windows for the simulation's primary phases. Mara returned to her workbench and began the delicate work of reconfiguring her harmonic resonator. She bypassed the standard command protocols that relied on brute force synchronization. Instead, she programmed the device to simulate shared ecological recovery tones. The sequence would be multi-phased, mimicking the gradual healing of a scarred landscape. The first phase introduced a low-frequency hum representing soil regeneration. The second wove in the melodic resonance of restored waterways. The third closed with a bright, harmonic interval signaling mutual recognition. This approach emphasized stewardship exchange over command, offering the matrix a gift of restoration in return for its energy. She calibrated the dampener's phase offsets into the resonator's feedback loop, ensuring the tones would ride the wave of the tidal surges rather than fight against them. Before committing the full sequence to the primary matrix, Mara needed verification. She routed a low-power output to an isolated peripheral node located on the chamber's outer rim. This node was dormant, disconnected from the main network, making it the perfect test bed. Beneath the chamber's hum, Mara noted the persistent subterranean signal she had tracked earlier. It remained distinct from the matrix's acoustic profile, a separate thread waiting for later investigation. She isolated the tidal data, ensuring the simulation would not be contaminated by the deeper resonance. Mara initiated the multi-phase simulation. The resonator emitted the carefully crafted tones, and the adaptive frequency rippled outward. On her monitor, she watched the defensive dampeners react. Rather than rejecting the input or triggering an alarm, the dampeners shifted their phase. They absorbed the recovery tones, integrating them into the local field structure without resistance. The node's status light glowed a steady, welcoming amber, confirming that the adaptive harmonic layers could safely interface with the chamber's shifting architecture. A faint chime resonated from the node, a subtle acknowledgement of the successful exchange. Mara allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The simulation was complete, and the results were unequivocal. By adapting to the dampener's cycles and offering tones of cooperative recovery, she had found the path forward. The adaptive harmonic layers validated against the shifting architecture, proving that the matrix could be calibrated without compromising the structural integrity of the way station. She saved the calibration parameters, knowing that this method would allow her to interface with the rest of the dormant infrastructure safely. The way ahead was clear, guided by the builder's philosophy and the planet's own gentle pulse. Mara stood at the primary interface, her reconfigured resonator humming steadily against the cool metal of the dais. The tidal matrix chamber breathed around her, a vast cathedral of dormant machinery now waking to her presence. Above, the glass domes filtered the sun-drenched light into shimmering ribbons across the control console. She watched the tidal flow sensors dance with their baseline instability, reacting to natural water table movements rather than fixed inputs. The decoded calibration matrix glowed softly in her peripheral vision, a map of cooperative harmony waiting to be sung back into existence. She took a slow breath, feeling the familiar weight of the stewardship logs resting within her resonator core. This was the moment where theory met tide. She initiated the full multi-phase sequence. The chamber responded with a low, thrumming vibration that traveled up through the soles of her boots. Adaptive harmonic layers unfurled from the resonator, weaving together her stewardship logs and the ancient frequencies of the architects into a single, flowing current. She transmitted the data to the matrix core, watching as the acoustic dampeners shifted their angles to catch the incoming wave. The resonance signatures began to align, painting the air with visible ripples of light that mirrored the tidal rhythms outside. For a moment, the chaotic bassline settled into a graceful, predictable cadence. Then the water table surged. The tidal currents broke their scheduled cycle, rushing in from the subterranean channels with unexpected force. The surge hit the matrix secondary dampeners like a physical blow, overloading their delicate acoustic shielding. A sharp feedback loop screamed through the chamber, scrambling the resonance signatures into jagged static. The light ripples fractured, and the console flickered violently under Mara's hands. Alarms chimed softly, warning of destabilizing harmonics, but she knew the automated protocols would only make it worse. She reached for the throttle levers, trying to dampen the input and ease the strain on the core, but the system resisted her. The intake valves locked firmly into a defensive posture, clamping down to protect the architecture from what it perceived as an attack. A cold, rigid demand echoed through the network. Higher energy throughput was required to stabilize. The matrix wasn't fighting her, it was demanding more of her to prove its point about adaptation. Panic tempted her for a fraction of a second, but she pushed it down. The architects had designed these systems to evolve alongside their users, not to dictate from the shadows. If the core demanded more energy, it meant the cooperative calibration was testing the strength of the harmonic bridge. She couldn't let it snap now, not when the resonance signatures were finally beginning to weave together. Mara stepped back from the primary console and moved toward the secondary power conduits running along the central control dais. Her fingers flew across the manual override panels, bypassing the safety governors that usually protected the grid. She needed auxiliary power, but the main reserves were locked tight to the archive connection secured for transit. The only other source available was her personal transit stabilizers, the very heart of her interstellar navigation equipment. She grabbed the heavy coupling cables and threw herself into the rerouting process. Sparks showered over her palms as she jacked the auxiliary lines directly into the matrix demand ports. The grid shuddered under the strain, her transit stabilizers groaning as they began to feed power back into the chamber. She watched the energy levels drop on her wrist display, the risk of total grid depletion hovering just above zero. If she pushed too hard, she would strand herself on this remote world. If she pulled back now, the feedback loop would destroy the delicate calibration she had spent weeks building. Mara closed her eyes and focused on the hum of the diverted power. She matched her breathing to the rhythm of the surging currents, lending her own steady heartbeat to the machine's frantic pulse. The harmonic gap widened, threatening to tear the system apart, but she forced herself to step into it. With a final, decisive twist of the manual bridge lever, she sealed the connection. The diverted power flooded the dampeners, stabilizing the feedback loop just as it reached its peak. The chamber held its breath, the jagged static smoothing back into a coherent, pulsing rhythm. Mara kept her hands on the controls, sweat cooling on her brow, waiting for the next surge to test the bridge she had just built with her own risk. The feedback loop clawed at the chamber walls, a jagged scream of displaced pressure that made Mara's teeth ache and her vision swim with static interference. Her auxiliary reserves had bled to critical levels during the multiphase sequence, leaving the harmonic bridge trembling on the edge of collapse. Every instinct screamed for her to reinforce the containment fields, to push back against the surging tide of raw energy threatening to fracture the chamber's delicate acoustic alignment. She could feel the structural integrity sensors twitching in warning, their red pulses mocking her dwindling power grid. But the decoded blueprints whispered a different truth, a philosophy etched into the way station's very bones. The architects had never built systems to dominate. They built nurseries for recovery, and recovery required listening rather than forcing. To fight the current was to invite destruction, but to flow with it was to find the path forward. Mara exhaled slowly, her fingers hovering over the manual override levers of the resonator array. The tremors in the control dais were becoming violent, shaking her grip on the console. If she fought the surge, the system would interpret it as hostility, escalating the dampeners until the infrastructure seized entirely and locked her out forever. Instead, she reached for the intake valves that had been locked in defensive mode since the sequence began. With a deliberate fluid motion, she disengaged the clamps and reversed the flow regulators. The heavy metal valves groaned as they rotated, the screech of shifting metal harmonizing briefly with the room's roar before settling into a mechanical click. The risk was immense. Opening the system to an unregulated surge with power reserves at their nadir could fry her suit's life support just as easily as it could stabilize the matrix. She committed to the action, trusting the cooperative calibration protocols over her fear of failure. She allowed the surge to feed directly into the resonator's collection chambers. The feedback roared through the conduits, a violent rush that threatened to overload the aging capacitors for a heartbeat before Mara adjusted the harmonic dampeners within her own suit interface. By matching the phase of the incoming wave rather than resisting it, she turned the destructive force into a charging current. Heat bloomed along her wrists as the capacitors glowed a soft amber, drawing power from the matrix to recharge her depleted reserves. The resonator hummed, drinking the chaotic energy and stabilizing against the planetary rhythm hidden within the noise. For a moment, the chamber seemed to hold its breath, the acoustic pressure spiking to a crescendo before snapping into a strange, suspended equilibrium. Mara watched the telemetry with bated breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. The defensive posture of the matrix, previously rigid and hostile, softened. The secondary dampeners unclenched their acoustic grip, dissolving from active blockers into passive resonance channels as the system processed this unexpected gesture. It had interpreted her adaptive compliance not as a drain or an attack, but as a cooperative calibration gesture. The way station was mirroring her actions, shifting its stance to meet her adaptation with reciprocal adjustment in the flow dynamics. Mara seized the opening, her hands moving deftly across the dais to fine-tune the harmonic layers of the matrix core. She cross-referenced the tidal pulse against the cooperative calibration matrix extracted from the archives, aligning the resonant frequencies with the slow, grinding heartbeat of the planetary recovery cycle. Light cascaded across the central dais, shifting from warning crimson to a soothing azure as the alignment indices locked into place. She could feel the water table responding, the tidal flow realigning with the newly established harmonic grid. The chaotic rhythm resolved into a synchronized pulse, a steady thrum that vibrated through the floor plates and up through the soles of Mara's boots. Gears deep within the walls engaged with the new frequency, sliding smoothly into alignment where they had previously ground in protest, their movement now silent and fluid. The chamber's internal architecture groaned once, a sound of relief rather than strain, as the tidal energy settled into a graceful arc. The destructive surge was gone, transformed by Mara's compliance into a cooperative rhythmic pulse that aligned perfectly with the matrix core. The harmonic bridge held firm, pulsing with renewed vitality, and the way station exhaled in a chorus of resonant harmonics that spoke of ancient design meeting modern stewardship in perfect accord. The air in the chamber grew warm and still, the earlier turbulence replaced by a gentle vibration that felt less like machinery and more like the breathing of a vast, living entity. The tidal matrix hums with stable harmonic alignment. Resonance signatures project clearly across the chamber's acoustic array. Mara stands at the central control dais, her hands hovering over the interface as she watches the projected waveform ripple outward in steady concentric rings. The data streams across her visor display, overlaying seamlessly against the archived blueprints she had spent cycles decoding. Every fluctuation matches the cooperative calibration matrix to a mathematical precision that feels almost intentional, though she knows it is simply the result of centuries of patient architectural design waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. She adjusts the gain on her sensors, filtering out the residual static from earlier cycles to isolate the pure harmonic tones. She traces the alignment points on her console, confirming that the tidal flow data mirrors the foundational principles exactly. The acoustic dampeners have settled into a quiet rhythm, allowing every harmonic layer to communicate without interference. There is no resistance in the system, only a quiet readiness that seems to anticipate her every movement. She takes a slow breath and initiates the final verification handshake. The interface responds with a soft chime as the matrix accepts the command without hesitation. Lines of light cascade down the chamber walls, weaving together the fragmented data into a single coherent record. Mara watches as the system logs her adaptive stewardship directly into its permanent memory, treating the interaction not as an intrusion, but as a natural continuation of a long conversation. The feedback loop stabilizes completely now, drawing power smoothly from the tidal currents rather than straining against them. She feels the familiar warmth of successful integration spreading through the floor grates and up into the soles of her boots. The console glows beneath her fingers, translating centuries of dormant potential into actionable parameters that guide the network forward. Every valve opens in perfect sequence, responding to the calibrated frequency with effortless grace. The chamber's ambient lighting shifts to a steady, welcoming hue, casting a gentle amber glow across the polished surfaces and dormant machinery. Full system integration has occurred, and the network node around them stabilizes with a quiet click that echoes softly through the vast space. Mara steps back from the dais to observe the transformation, noting how the architecture seems to breathe easier now that the calibration cycle has reached its natural conclusion. A quiet satisfaction settles over the space. She turns her attention to the terminal to compile the verified resonance data packets. As she organizes the information, she reflects on how the machine's evolutionary response directly mirrors the community's own cooperative practices outside these walls. The architects did not force compliance. They built a framework that rewards adaptation and mutual growth. It is a philosophy that has sustained her people long before the first blueprint was ever unearthed, and seeing it reflected in this ancient infrastructure brings a profound sense of validation. She packages the data with meticulous care, preparing the archives for future stewards who will undoubtedly walk these halls and draw the same conclusions she has just confirmed. The process feels less like an engineering task and more like a shared conversation across generations. The tidal matrix successfully locks into the cooperative calibration frequency, its internal mechanisms aligning perfectly as the final phase completes. A verified resonance signature projects outward from the central core, rippling through the chamber in a steady, unwavering pattern. The waveform aligns perfectly with the decoded builder philosophy, leaving no room for doubt about the original intent. The system has not imposed its will upon the environment. It has simply opened a path for collaboration. Mara watches the signature pulse across her display, recognizing the clear confirmation that the architects designed these systems to evolve alongside their users rather than dictate behavior. The legacy is no longer hidden in fragments, but stands whole and functional, ready to support the next phase of recovery with quiet grace. She logs the final parameters into her personal drive, knowing this moment marks a turning point in how her people understand their place within the wider network. The harmonic alignment settles into a permanent state, echoing the enduring promise of cooperative stewardship across the stars. The chamber hummed with a steady, low-frequency thrum that vibrated through the soles of Mara's boots. The tidal matrix had settled into its verified resonance signature, the waveform projected on the console displaying a perfect match to the cooperative calibration matrix extracted from the climate archives. There were no more surges, no defensive posturing, just the quiet, rhythmic pulse of a system that had accepted her stewardship and integrated her adaptive logs into its permanent record. The power source, which had been temporarily strained during the feedback loop, was now recovering smoothly via tidal integration, the energy cycles flowing with renewed efficiency. The data streams flowing through the console were meticulous. Mara watched as the verified resonance signatures aligned with the star map overlay, each node clicking into place with a digital chirp that mirrored the tidal rhythm. She compiled the final packets for archival integration, ensuring every variable of the cooperative calibration matrix was preserved for future stewards who might one day follow this path. Mara tapped the comms array on her wrist gauntlet, routing the stream of verified resonance data packets through the purifier. The acoustic filters were already responding to the migratory frequency signature emerging from the coordinates ahead. She keyed in a transmission to the Regional Stewardship Council. "Councillors, the tidal matrix calibration is complete," she reported, her voice calm in the sun-drenched quiet of the chamber. "Data packets are verified and integrated. The cooperative calibration matrix holds universal across these nodes. We can proceed with the transit network expansion." A pause as the signal returned. The Council's response was warm and professional. "Acknowledged, Mara. Your work strengthens the web. Bonds hold firm. Safe passage." Mara logged the update, noting the robust community support that underpinned her efforts. She turned to her workbench, gathering the diagnostic tools. Wrenches, resonance calibrators, and the spool of harmonic filament clicked into their magnetic slots. Her harmonic resonator hummed softly, adaptive intake valves still engaged, but syncing with the now stable tidal pulse. She moved to the transit alcove where her skiff waited. Kneeling by the undercarriage, she recalibrated the transit stabilizers. The blueprints had revealed a clear path. The purifier was ready to lock onto the new acoustic input. She adjusted the dampening fields, ensuring the vessel would navigate the dormant way stations without triggering unnecessary alarms. A confirmation chime echoed from the integrated medical automaton logs. The network status remained fully responsive, assuring her the infrastructure would welcome her vessel alongside the planet's own recovery. As she stood, the stabilized network map flickered to life on the alcove's display. Mara studied the topology of light connecting the way stations. It was beautiful in its simplicity. The machine's adaptive response during the calibration had validated everything the archives suggested about the original architects. They had not designed these systems to dictate behavior or enforce territorial expansion. Instead, they rejected those paths entirely, favoring ecological partnership and cooperative calibration. She traced the coordinates, seeing a pattern of connection rather than conquest. The way stations served as nurseries for planetary recovery, activated by verified stewards who maintained a dialogue with the machines rather than issuing commands. The architects had rejected territorial expansion, favoring ecological partnership that allowed the world to heal through every cycle. Mara logged the successful node stabilization in her personal archives, timestamping the moment the cooperative matrix locked into place across the network nodes. She shouldered her tool pack and moved toward the chamber exit. The air felt different now, charged with a subtle shift in the harmonic baseline. As she reached the threshold, a sound caught her attention, a faint, rhythmic pulse emanating from the matrix's deep core. It was unfamiliar, distinct from the tidal rhythm that had stabilized the chamber. She paused, turning back to look at the glowing array. The pulse was slow, deliberate, and undeniably active. It indicated the presence of a dormant stewardship node, one that had been waiting for her next coordinate cluster activation. Mara calculated the migratory frequency signature needed to answer the call. The rhythm pulsed with gentle insistence, suggesting a node that had slept for eons but remained aware within the network's memory. She stepped toward the alcove, leaving behind a system that thrived on cooperation as the deep core's invitation continued.